welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Are we on? We should probably start talking.
Yeah. Well,
I don't hear my own self.
I know.
Do you like what I've done with my closet?
It's amazing. Loving the backdrop here. I think people are going to have to go on YouTube to appreciate that.
That's right. Or maybe we sound really crisp, but this is our 100th episode. We are in New York City in a production studio recording. How did we get here?
I have no idea. It's weird talking to you and actually looking you in the eyes. I feel like can I touch you?
Yeah.
I feel like I want to touch you and look into your eyes because I don't get to do those things at all when we record.
I know. It's a totally different energy that I'm still feeling out.
Yeah.
It's so weird. It's like, oh yeah, she's really here. Okay, that's...
No, I think it's okay. I think the listeners don't mind us fawning over each other.
Interesting.
It is.
Like, right, that's Sarah. Of course, it's always Sarah, but it's different when you're in person. It's like, yeah.
This is the first episode we're recording in person where it's just the two of us. Although I say just the two of us, we do have an engineer because that's how fancy we are. So, Hi, Suki.
Hi, Suki. This is really nice. This is fun. I want to do this again.
Yeah, I think every week we should be doing this. I'm going to come to New York every week for recording.
That's right. That's where we're at now.
Deal.
Okay.
But also, this is our 100th episode, which was kind of a bit of a coincidence, really. I happened to be in New York, and then we realised that we could record our 100th episode together in person. And I feel a little bit like I've forgotten how to speak.
Really?
Yeah. I feel like my words are running into each other a bit, and I can, like you said, the energy's different.
Okay. There you go. What a way to somatically regulate.
Exactly.
What are we even talking about for our 100th episode? Well, I don't know what we're calling it. I made a list. This is one of the only episodes for which I have prepped.
Yes, and I've prepped as well. I think we said, let's have a think about these 100 episodes we've done together, what we've both learned, because I think maybe sometimes people don't necessarily think about how you and I, we're still doing the work.
Yeah.
Right? I think sometimes I listen to these episodes back when I'm editing and I think, gosh, Sarah, you sound like you've got it all figured out. When I'm saying, oh, I check in with myself and I do this, I'm going, yeah, I do.
You don't?
And I also don't.
Thank you for letting me know that, because when I listen to those episodes, I'm like, Sarah's got it all figured out as far as checking in.
But even worth, I guess, commenting on, coming here and having cameras on us when we're recording. When we're in Zoom, it's just our shoulders and head. And of course, we both had our own difficult experiences with our bodies and still do sometimes as well. And you and I, we had this back and forth about, what do we wear on the podcast?
Yes.
You know, shouldn't we be dressing up a bit and looking a certain way? And we went back and forth a bit and decided on yoga pants and loungewear.
Oh my gosh. I knew I could kind of count on you for that, but I did give you the option of going professional if you wanted to. But gosh, this is just so much more me. What a freedom. I just feel like this is what you're allowed to do.
Yeah.
Like I would not want to be dressed up right now.
Yeah.
I even brought a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
That might have coffee stains.
But we're sitting on a sofa. We're in our socks. We've got our feet up on the sofa. So we're in a studio, but we're trying to make
keep it real,
cozy. And when I was looking at the footage when we were getting set up, it looks like we're just at a sleepover here, hanging out.
That's kind of my vibe in real life, like much preferred.
Yeah.
So I've sort of created a list of things that I have learned from you, and also things that I have learned from doing the podcast itself.
Yeah. Same here.
Okay,
exactly
good.
The same. So some of it's things that I've personally taken. I feel like professionally, the way I work with people has expanded and developed as a result of this podcast, and things that I've learned from you, and how I think about things has broadened. And I love the differences and the commonality between us. I think that has just been a wonderful thing for me, really.
Which I've got it here, but one of the things I put on my list was that I think when we started the podcast, I had more of an assumption that we were more similar. And as we've talked, I've realized our differences. what I've learned from noticing that has been that differences can feel uniting instead of like there's been less of a sense of right and wrong or competition, especially when you'll say something. I'm like, that is just so good, you know, or like that perspective is so right on. And instead of feeling like, why aren't I like that? Or why didn't I think of that first? Or admittedly, sometimes I do think, why can't I speak a little slower? But it's been more of a way of enhancing rather than dividing.
Yeah. And exactly what you say there, I go through exactly the same thing. I'll say something and you'll go, actually, I think of it like this. And I'm like, damn it, she's right. Like, why didn't I think of it like that as well? And I think it's so helpful. I think it's helpful for people listening because sometimes when I listen to podcasts, people will say something on a podcast about this. And in my head, I'm going, yeah, but. And that's part of what we do with the episodes, right? It's but this, but that. It's like, yes, that's true, but.
Yes.
And we talk about the buts. We're all about the buts.
Yeah. I think that's what our episodes begin with, right? They all begin with buts.
Exactly. But I also, when we talked about going back over and reflecting on these 100 episodes and what we've learned, and hopefully this will be useful for the listeners as well, I listened to our first ever podcast episode. And I think there was so much resonance between us, but the differences were there. And I remember coming out of that first episode thinking, gosh, like, we're the same, we're so similar. And then the differences became more apparent, but there was resonance. And I think there can be difference, but still resonance. And that, I think, speaks to the nuance of struggling with something like this, too.
What have been our differences?
What happened?
What have they been? Where do they reside in your mind?
In my mind, when I think of like the biggest difference, I feel like you come at things through the body. And I kind of I go top down, you go bottom up.
That is so strange. Because that is not, I do that now, but it's so anti to what I have always been my whole life. So I must be learning something.
And that might be the other way around for me, actually. I think like this idea of top down, of using my mind first was so something that I'd learned in this process. If I look back a few years ago, my emotions ran everything. I couldn't think differently to how I was feeling. Mm-hmm. And that skill, or practice, I should say, has been probably the most important thing that I've learned through going through recovery from an eating disorder.
That's so interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that was how you would see it.
And also in those early episodes, I feel like you sound incredibly articulate from the beginning. And I have this cadence to the way I speak sometimes where I will pause almost in the middle of a sentence just to find the next words. And in the edit, I've got much better at closing the gaps. But in those earlier episodes, I feel like I'm like stop, start. And I'm like, it almost feels like that someone's cut the word off. And that I was self-conscious about listening back.
So also one of the things that I wrote down, and let me see if I don't think I wrote it so eloquently. I could probably I put number 2. I have learned the value of a regulated voice because of you. So I remember listening. I think that one of the first times that we spoke on Instagram, like through DM, I think I may have sent you a voice memo, or maybe it was a text. And I said, there's something about your voice that's so calm and soothing. And I think I've told you also that my mother said the same thing when she met you. And I there's something about your voice that has impacted my sense of slow is safe, like slow is helpful, slow is like I can get on board with that, because you don't rush through your sentences like someone's going to like bite you if you don't, you know what I mean? I don't know I said bite, but you do think, and I feel like that's an art to me. So it's interesting that you would have perceived it the other way around, because I feel like I've learned how to have more comfort in stopping and thinking about what I want to say next, so that I'm not just like fumbling over my own thoughts and words.
Because I think it's an art to think as fast as you do. How does she like get that together so quickly? It just comes and it's there and it's formed. Anyway, we could spend the whole episode talking about how we talk, or we could talk about what we talk about.
Well, that was one of my talking points.
Yeah,
it's valid.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for that. I do. I think that your regulation has been influential to me.
Well, interesting you mentioned regulation. That leads me quite nicely onto one of mine. And you did a we've spoken about this on the podcast, but we haven't used your amazing word on the podcast that you came up with on Instagram. So you talk a lot about food as a way of regulating. And that language has been so helpful for me to make sense of that, because I hadn't ever thought about it in that way. So even just that concept has been useful for me at a foundational level. And you came up with the word. Do you want to share with the listeners your word?
Regulating.
I couldn't applaud you on Instagram, and I'm just going to applaud you here in the studio.
Well, thank you. That word actually came off of a post that I put out to my subscribers, and one of the people that I worked with years ago, who were at this point were friends, and she said, we need to come up with a term for this. So I thought about it, and I said, regulating. And then I made a post of it the next day, which you quite liked. Yes. So I've been using it ever since. I think I might TM that.
I think you should. I think it's so useful when people are eating in a self-regulating way. Often, unless you've got a word or you've got the language to understand what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing or why. You just know that you want to eat. You can't understand why you can't stop. And so to understand is, look, I'm trying to perform a function here, and I'm trying to regulate myself. Well, then that brings up this whole theme of how do I regulate myself? And trying to then bring in, I guess, other tools and other methods to self-regulate so that it's not just food. So that, I think, and just all the way that you come at it through the body, and I've sort of written this as a separate point, but it kind of comes into that as well, this idea of safety. Mm-hmm. I think, again, that was concepts that I heard through the way that you speak about it. I hadn't heard anyone else talk about it, maybe in a very surface level way, but the depths that you go to with words like that. I hear people say, I need control, and I'm just trying to control. And people will even judge themselves and say, I'm a control freak. And I think control gets a bad rap, because who likes a controlling person? But when you switch that around and go, well, what's the function of control? Oh, it's about safety. Where do you feel unsafe? That line of questioning and exploration has been massively helpful with my clients. I think that's the one that has really, I say transformed the way that I work with people, because people really resonate with that subject, that concept, which I don't as much, because I find more safety in, I don't know, I feel like my rebellion is a way, which we spoke about last week. My rebellion is a way of trying to be safe. Like freedom makes me feel safer. Right. And whenever I kind of express that to you, like the other week when I was saying, and I couldn't find the part of me that was suffering and that was freeing, you were like, that would send me into a panic. And I have to remember, like, oh yeah, I think a lot of people that would. I don't think I'm probably, maybe not even in the majority. I think you might be in the majority in the way that you view it from a safety perspective.
It's the naming, right? Like the being able to call something, like the word safety. When I landed on that word myself, and why is this? It's interesting because at one time you said, and I don't know if this is the same thing, but you said as therapists we're trained not to ask why something, and I remember thinking, oh gosh, that's all I ever ask. And then I remember thinking, nope, I still stand by the why. I really like the why. Knowing why and being able to name something and name the why for me is transformative. It is very orienting. It's like, yes, I'm looking for safety, and I don't need to shame myself for that. When I can identify the cause, right? There's a way of that, putting it in a container that helps me understand myself, which I think is what you're saying. And that word safety has been, it's been helpful for me too. It's why I bring it up so much. It's a huge, but it does so many jobs of naming something, reframing something, and taking away that shame around it, right? It's like, well, of course we're all looking for safety. And I find that when people hear the word, there's almost something in their body that sort of goes like, oh, yes, like that's what I'm trying to do. Whereas all these other layers of, why am I doing this? Because I'm controlling, because I'm, safety is such a basic, that's a resonance, Well,
the why is interesting because we do ask why. We're just encouraged not to use the word why.
Oh.
Because the word why, for many people, it sends them right up into their thinking. Right? And ideally, we want them to stay connected to what's actually going on in their experience. So rather than saying to someone, why do you think you feel unsafe? Like, okay, well, you resonate with this idea of feeling unsafe. I'm wondering what that's all about. It's still asking why. Yeah. We're just like mucking about with language.
You duped me.
So like we've not talked I don't even remember saying this on the
You
podcast,
did.
but I know I would have done because that definitely resonates, the idea of the word why. But you've been carrying that with you for how many episodes?
Many, at least half.
Yeah.
I'm always careful whenever I notice myself saying why. I'm like, darn, Sarah wouldn't approve. But to fold that into another thing I've learned from doing this podcast is the increased amount of comfort I have with having my own opinion of something and of multiple truths. So, for example, when you first said that therapists don't ask why, I think this was around the time that I was like, I've just signed up to become a therapist, which I've recently decided not to do. But, kind of sort of like, oh gosh, why do you ask why? Clearly it's not helpful. And then coming around to thinking, yes, it is. Yes, it is helpful. Now, thank you very much for validating me. But there have been so many times where I've had an opinion of something that maybe you have departed from, or you've had an opinion of something that I have departed from. And the ease in which we're able to talk about it and highlight different sides of the same, or different perspectives in a way that doesn't feel activating. It's just very open-minded, has helped me find more safety in listening to what I really think. Because there have been times where you've said things that I'm like, to your point, like, why didn't I think of it like that? That's exactly that's what I should have said. And there have been times where you said something that's like, I totally see that, and I still maintain this. And that's really helpful for my own personal boundaries of my own inner voice, of trusting my inner voice. Because I think prior to doing this podcast, I don't know, maybe if it's prior to recovery in general, but there's just so much room to question oneself and to back down when there is an opposing view. And I actually was just thinking of this last night as I was listening. I forget why. I was listening to something and I realized that my own opinion on it was different. And I didn't feel like the speaker was automatically right just because they made sense. It was kind of like, no, I still see my perspective here and I'm going to hold there. Not I'm going to hold there and I'm never going to back down. It's not a stubbornness. It's just more of there is merit to what I'm saying here, and there's something in it that I'm not going to necessarily bulldoze myself away from or be convinced so quickly that I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. I think it's just in having conversation with another open-minded person that is allowed. And every week, you know what I mean? To do that so often and to trust someone and to trust that someone's not going to run away if I have a different opinion or reject me if I have a different opinion, and be able to present theirs in a way that's just an offering and a suggestion, but not a push, has helped me to trust myself.
Mm. And what I hope that offers to the listeners then is hearing you and I with two slightly different ways of looking at it and being able to look at both of those and see both of those at the same time. Mm-hmm. So what I hope is that in that dynamic, that's actually useful to people.
And that also they may have an opinion that's different from ours. Mm-hmm. Like if they're going, yeah, but, to not dismiss your own yeah, but if we don't necessarily get to it or if we haven't quite validated it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I don't know what I'm saying exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Quite.
Precisely.
Quite.
What else have you got?
What else have I got? So another thing that you talk about, and I first heard from you, even though I don't think it was necessarily your original term as such, is the idea of self-abandonment.
Oh, yeah.
Because I would have always called it numbing, checking out. And there was a little bit more judgment for me around those things. Because numbing felt like, well, I shouldn't be numbing. Like, numbing is not a good thing. Like, no one's going to say, oh, yeah, go numb yourself. Like, that's what you need to do in this
numb
situation.
Yourself on a T-shirt.
It's an idea for merch. Becca, write that down. So actually reframing it, now this is, I think, a real personal one for me. Reframing it as self-abandonment feels so much more gentle. It's not this whole, oh, I have to be present. I mustn't check out. I mustn't numb. I mustn't this. It's like, okay, well, I'm abandoning myself here. And there's a little bit of a choice in that. And not even a choice. I can't find the right words. For me, it was just a shift. You know, sometimes when you just hear a different word, something expressed in another way, and you're like, oh, like that feels truer for me, actually, what's happening. Because numbing to me, I tell you what, numbing feels like I can't cope.
Yeah.
So I have to numb. And then there's judgment about not being able to cope. Self-abandonment feels a lot more like, oh, hang on. The solution to self-abandonment isn't, I have to white knuckle, I'm not allowed the thing, I should just feel all my feelings. It's more, when I realize it's that, there's an implicit invitation to come back. And it feels like an invitation as opposed to, this really isn't a good idea to be doing this. And that, I think, has, in my relationship with myself and my relationship with food, that has closed a bit of a gap for me.
Yes. Almost as you're talking about it now, it's kind of like numbing feels like something that you do, whereas self-abandonment feels like something that happens to you. Like there's a bit of an inner child in it, right? Like the there's a bit of an in it. Let me help you. You know, the invitation is so much more tender versus better stop doing this, numbing is wrong, you know? Yeah. I can appreciate that. Oh, one thing that I've learned, another thing that I've from the beginning, I would say these were I was having a difficult time choosing. Not that I have to. One is the states, right? So the flipping back and forth between states and not having it necessarily be like, I have achieved, I have arrived, I am recovered. I think the language that I use, I sometimes will still use, but I hear you in the back of my mind. It gives you a more sense of freedom of that. Sometimes we're in a state and sometimes, you know, state A and state B. And not that it's a journey from one to another. Again, that's a concept that I think nonlinear recovery, you know, recovery is not a destination, that these are ideas that I've heard before, but to think about it in the way that you describe with states and the way you tend to describe it, which I'm not doing right now, but you do, it has been a helpful way of visualizing even it for me, as well as an early conversation we had on boundaries and rules. What episode was that? Was it in like the first 10?
It was one of the early ones, yeah.
And I remember coming into that episode, yep, right, I got it. Yep, this is what I think of boundaries and this is what I think of rules. And hearing your take on that has been one of the things that to this day has shifted the way, in fact, to the point of my association of boundaries before was quite averse. The idea, the very word made me feel trapped. Whereas I think of them now in that supportive way and I can appreciate them. That has been something that, I don't know if this feeds on what I was saying earlier, but you have taught me to think about things where I might come from that anti-lens, including the word anti-diet I've since abandoned. This frame of like, this is a good way to think and this is a bad way to think. And I don't like boundaries. And to sort of say, no, a word that might feel like one thing can actually be invited to feel like another thing. There's more flexibility in these things. And maybe it was just the point of where I was being earlier on in my own recovery, that there was more of a positioning on my part of my heels are on the ground about like no restriction, you know, I was very, very gung-ho about that. And over time have learned to see things, I don't know, I just feel like I've softened a little bit on the whole thing and I don't have such a stance on certain things I do, but otherwise I think that I've really softened on concepts like boundaries, like anti-diet.
Interesting you mentioned that episode because I listened to that episode this week when I was like dipping into some old episodes in preparation for this. I listened to the boundaries one, or at least part of it. And I was listening to the two of us sort of dancing around this word and going, well, this bit, this is how it feels to me. And like, well, this is how it feels to me. And like, oh, I see that. Oh, I see that. And that was, I think, probably one of the early episodes where you and I came at it from a very different place. And it's always that reminder that when you say, actually, this brings up this for me, it's that constant reminder of like, okay, yeah, these words do not feel the same for everybody. Yeah. I can use that word flippantly with somebody and not realizing or not thinking, not testing out how it's landing with them. And I think that kind of general theme throughout the podcast is testing out, not assuming that the words I'm using feel the same to everybody.
Yeah. There's another one that it's on the tip of my tongue. That has been the case for that, where you said that word doesn't sit right with me or it feels a certain way. And I have had that opposite experience where I've been like, oh, I would never have thought about it like that.
There was one. I know. I can't remember.
All right. Well, never mind then. Edit that out.
I'll just insert the word in here if we come up with it. It'll just be me going, gratitude or whatever it is. It wasn't gratitude. It was something else. No, it wasn't.
No. Yeah. It was it's sit with.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Well, that might have been one.
That might not be the one I'm thinking, but there is one. Yeah. I when people say I sit with feelings, inside I clench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I think about that now.
It's so passive.
It is. This is why, like, several episodes I've been like, and how do you do that? Can you give me a step-by-step instructional on how you do that? Which you did.
Yeah.
Several times you've you've brought your own emotional play-by-play onto the podcast, so I appreciate that too.
Yeah, I think that's something just in doing a podcast generally. Like I freaked out a bit at the beginning when I was realizing I was so unfiltered because I'm just chatting to you on Zoom. Totally
no one was listening.
Exactly, totally forgetting that people might actually hear this. Clients might hear this as well.
Yeah.
All of that and those questions that came to mind, and a lot of nervousness at the beginning as well from like, I just know that certain fields of therapy just don't agree with the amount of self-disclosure that I do. And that's been conversations I've been having recently with therapists who are like, you shouldn't be sharing everything you're sharing. I'm like, how else do we share stories? I can't bring my clients' stories, nor would I want to. That's just not, people's stories are their own to share. Otherwise, it's just you and me going, well, you should do this, and this is a good idea, and talking about these really dry concepts without the lived experience part. So I'm okay with carrying on doing that. But each time someone kind of, I don't know, criticizes or comes at me a bit about it, I do feel it. There's always that, oh gosh, because it's vulnerable and it's difficult. And there've been a couple of episodes that I've come off feeling really raw. The photograph one, after I'd spoken at the conference, that one I felt really raw. I felt like as well guilt about not acknowledging my straight size privilege. So I was feared that it might like alienate other people in the larger body if I'm feeling the way that I was feeling about a photo. And I mean, it might have been too soon to have spoken about it because I was still very much in it. And the recent one, the transitions in New York, when I came off that, I felt so raw. And I thought in the edit, I was thinking I probably won't. I'll probably say to Steph, let's not put it out. But when I edited it, I was in a different place. And I was like, oh no, this is okay because I'm feeling okay now.
Right. You weren't interpreting it through that lens.
I do feel like this has been a bit of therapy for me, this podcast. Like I've been able to process a lot of
absolutely.
things. And I basically sometimes I get like free coaching off of you as well.
I get free therapy. I've had a client say to me, do you feel like your podcast is like Sarah giving you therapy?
I was like,
I didn't think so until now.
Is that what it sounds like? I don't think so.
I didn't think so either, but there maybe have been sometimes you'll be like, oh, how do you feel about that stuff?
Right back at you. Yeah. Same thing. When I was scrolling through episodes the other day, I saw the title, the episode with your mum.
Yes.
And I have the one clear, well, not the one, but there is a very clear image from that podcast that I remember I really felt it at the time. You and I haven't spoken about this. I really felt it at the time, and it was really kind of burned in my psyche. It really kind of stuck in my psyche. And I think I got to see like you where you were in that episode, like seeing it through your mum's eyes as well. There was this whole, oh gosh, I feel like I'm going to cry. There was this whole like, wow, like look at where she was. Like the fact that you came from, because I don't feel like my depths of self-loathing, I don't think were like equivalent to what you describe and what you went through. And it was the image, and even at the time you said, oh, that's one of my most shameful moments. We can cut this out if you don't want this in this episode. But the image during the christening when you were in your room on the floor with a pair of scissors in your hand, scratching at the dresser, like when your mum said that, and like obviously that was the first time that had been said on the podcast, I was just like, oh.
It's the first time I told anyone.
Yeah.
Do you know we just got new furniture in our bedroom?
Yeah.
So that dresser is now was put into my garage. It's sitting there.
Yeah.
It made me feel crazy. And I don't want to use that word in a derogatory way either. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but it made me feel crazy. And it made me feel like people would see that.
I think it was hearing your mum describing you going into these really dark holes. Yeah. Like she kept saying these dark places that you were in and no one could pull you out. I think for me, it brought this whole new appreciation of your journey, like of where you'd come from and where you got to now. I'm proud of you, kiddo.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Because I've literally got tears running down my face, and
thank you. That's nice.
And even just it really impressed actually at the way that you are able to articulate yourself to your mum, to articulate yourself like that to family members. I think it's a rare skill that people can even do that. And I know it's taken time to get.
No, it hasn't. It's. I don't think of it as a skill. I think of it as like a dysfunction of our family because we like just say whatever the heck we want without any care for like. And I think it just comes from me feeling there is no filter when it comes to the interaction of our family members with each other, and so I can just say what I'm feeling.
But you said it with care, like when the way you were talking to your mom on the podcast, and the way that you held her. As she was talking about things that she had found really difficult, was not the dysfunctional side of what you're saying. There was a real acknowledgement of her position and her feelings in everything that you were saying, and you really validated her as well.
I know, but did you notice it came from here? It wasn't there was an emotion in it. It was all in my head. Still things I work on, Sarah. Telling you what really goes on. Yeah, it was all intellectual. This reminds me of the episode where you started spontaneously crying about your mom and offered that and allowed us to see that. And the comfort, ease, what's the word? Like you just allow that, you know, it just comes up in it. And I think that has been, I've noticed since that episode where that happened to you, maybe it was happening a bit before, but I've noticed that sometimes I'll get tears behind my eyes when I feel full of an emotion, positive or negative, that I do not feel like I have to blink back. Like I'm like, oh, there it is. Like, and it doesn't necessarily turn into a sob fest. It's just there's some emotion right there that comes up that you model well.
Yeah. So I can't really name the emotion. If I'm trying to name the emotion of what was coming up then as I was talking, I just felt moved. It kind of feels inadequate because it doesn't really describe what that was. I guess it was something about I want to use words like gravitas and like the bigness of what's been. I think when we're talking about it from the past, like when you're talking about it on the podcast, it's very like, oh, like this. And whenever you're talking about the past, you're bringing it into a context of something that we're talking about. And this wasn't in the context of a theme or anything like this. This was just like a really dark moment, you know, which I appreciate you allowing that to be in the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I don't feel... I don't know why, but I don't feel shame about it, except for that bit. Fair enough. About the dresser, yes.
My last, on a lighter note, you probably know what this one might be. My favorite analogy, like just the best analogy that's ever been given about anything. And like, today is a great example. Apropos. So tell everybody how you showed up to meet me today.
Well, I walked off the train. I got off the train to walk up several blocks to get here, and I really had to go to the bathroom. So to the point where when I have to go to the bathroom so badly, I cannot think straight. And so I think I walked right by you, right? So I was looking for where you were. Barely. I was just a little bit muddled because I really just had to go. You texted me. You just walked right by me. It's so funny that you didn't like knock or come out. I
yelled.
Oh, you did?
So the door was open to the coffee shop. As you walked past, you were 1.5 meters away from me. And I went, Steph.
My earbuds were in.
I know. And then I yelled it again, kind of forgetting I was in the coffee shop. Everybody in the coffee shop turned around and looked. And I was imagining that you would double back any second. So I waited a few moments and then I was like, and then I looked out, I couldn't even see you up the street. I
was really on a mission. When I have to go to the bathroom, it's just like me. Anyway, right. So I can double back to you eventually. And just was like, I need to pee right now. I don't know if I even said hello to you. I don't remember. I just really had to go to the bathroom.
You were dancing.
Which is what I do. And then you two were like, go over there. Went over there. No bathroom. Realized I wasn't going to get to a bathroom and was able to then return to the coffee shop, put my head on and say, I'm not going to be able to get to the bathroom for another 10 minutes. So, hello, how are you? And just sort of shut it off, which... the analogy lent itself to that, which you can go ahead.
So the analogy came up on the episode we were talking about not being able to eat certain foods in moderation. So we're talking about the idea of giving up things like sugar, because if you're not eating sugar and you normally binge on sugar, surely that solves the problem. And really recognizing that our biology is so tied in with our psychology. And you use the example of if you need the bathroom, the closer you know the bathroom is, the more desperate you become. And I think most people can relate to this experience. It's like, I kind of need the toilet, but then when you know the bathroom's coming closer, it's your whole biology responds to that knowledge. And that was the example that we're using with something like sugar. People will say, well, we don't need this. We didn't have sugar in this form 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But the psychology is knowing it's available, knowing its proximity. And I think that's the temptation as well. We're saying, well, if the food's not in the house, I don't have to negotiate with myself about it. And the problem is that, not problem, but the thing is that often works until it doesn't. It works for a bit, right? Until it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and also, that's what will then, like when it is around, then we really don't know what to do with that. Then we pee all over the place. Yeah. So to speak. What was funny though is we came into the studio and I'm like, where's the bathroom? Where's the bathroom? And it's of the picture they've got of like they have the gender, neutral bathroom, and it's like the dancing person. Like it's not just a picture of the stick figure. Did you notice?
I didn't notice.
You didn't see?
I didn't notice.
Oh, it's so funny because the picture of the stick figure with the dress on is like doing this, like crouching and covering, which is exactly where I was as I barely made it.
So you felt seen.
I felt so validated as I was like, yes, and then I immediately walked in. I'm gonna go take a picture of it later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think everything else that I had written down, we kind of covered.
Yeah, and probably from a time perspective, we're probably at about. Right. Yeah. I said.
I have, every intention of being here again on our 200th episode.